Today, I'm going to show you one of the best tools that I've developed in my 17 years of investing in property. So as you can see here, I have a table. On the board, I've got all the different strategies that you can do in property. And I've also written down qualities, speed, return on investment, how passive it is, how risky it is. Using this table, I'm going to rank each method out of 10 and decide once and for all which property investment strategy is king of 2025. Now, this will be different and personalized for me and for you, depending on who you are and depending on what you're wanting to achieve. If I rate something a 5 out of 10, that means it's satisfactory. 10 is absolutely incredible, and anything less than 5 is bad. And maybe you could make your own board and you could do this yourself to work out which strategies you really want to focus on in 2025. I did this about a year or so ago, but I never put it on YouTube. But I think the market's changed. Interest rates are different, house prices, yields, taxes. So this is something that I'd suggest probably doing every year or so. So let's start with rent to serviced accommodation. So what is rent to serviced accommodation? Well, it's when you rent a property and then you stick it on Airbnb. So from a return on investment point of view, I mean, it's incredible because you can just put down like $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 and make $1,000 a month, which is absolutely sky high. So I'm gonna give it a 10 in terms of return on investment. In terms of speed, I'm gonna give it a 9 because you can find a property really fast and just get the keys within a week and stick it on Airbnb. Difficulty, so hold on. Difficulty, if I put a 10, that means it's really easy, right? And a 1 means it's really hard. So I'm gonna put a 3 because I do think it's quite hard. I think that people think it's easy, but there's more to it than just sticking it on Airbnb. In reality, you've got to get procedures and systems and an online channel manager set up, and I think it's a bit harder than people think. Prior knowledge, I don't think you need much prior knowledge, to be honest, if any at all. But I'm gonna give that a 5 because you do need to know what you're doing. Startup capital, yeah, I mean, probably I'm gonna give it an 8. You do need a little bit of money. Risk, I do think this strategy comes with risk because you don't actually own the asset, and it can be a bit seasonal, especially if you've not got the prior knowledge. So I'm gonna say risk. I think it's quite high risk, so I'm gonna give that a low score, like a 3. Luckily, you're not putting that much money down in the first place. You've got break clauses and stuff, but yeah. How passive is it? It can be very passive, but to begin with, it's not going to be passive at all. So I'm going to give that a 3. Our Refurbish Refinance is where you buy a house that's normally run down or it needs some work doing to it. So you buy it with a bridging loan or cash, and then you push the value up. And then rather than selling it and making a chunk of money, you get a new mortgage and you refinance it and get all of your money back. And it's a way that you can recycle your cash and build an empire. So it's a brilliant strategy. BRR, return on investment, well, infinite, because you're literally buying a property, pushing the value up, refinancing it, getting all your money back and being left with a free house. So yeah, it really should be a 10 out of 10. In terms of speed, it's slow as anything. I'm gonna give it a 1. It is one of the slowest things. Just buying a house takes forever. And then you've got to refurb it and then refinance it. The whole process, start to finish, is going to be a good year. Difficulty, it is quite difficult. You're dealing with builders, surveyors. I think it's very difficult. I'm going to give it a 2. Prior knowledge, yeah, you can get proper burned. I'm going to give it a 2. Startup capital, again, not great from a startup capital perspective. You do need money. You cannot do this without money. Now, you can use other people's money, absolutely, but again, you do need, I'm going to give it a 2. Risk. The good thing about BRR, of course, it's not without any risk, but you're owning the asset. Unlike rent to rent, where you could invest a load of money and be left with nothing, with BRR, I'm going to give it a 7. How passive it is, again, to start with, nothing's passive because you need to put the builders in place, put the team together. But once you're up and running, it's pretty passive. For me, it's passive, so I'm going to give it a 5. Great. Lease option agreement. Lease option agreement is where you buy a house now with the agreement that you can pay for it later. So you're benefiting from all of the capital appreciation. You don't own it now, but you have a fixed in agreed price. So it's a really cool strategy. So return on investment, again, it's immense, 10. Speed, it's pretty quick. It can be, but it's not like as quick as rent to rent. So I'm going to give it a 5. How difficult is it? I'm going to give it a 2. I think it's quite difficult. If you don't know what you're doing, it's not going to happen. Prior knowledge, 2. Startup capital, very, very, very low. I mean, I think that's got to be a 7. Risk, it's actually not very risky at all because with lease option agreement, you have the option, not the obligation to buy it. So I'm going to give it a 5. How passive is it? No, I give it a 5 as well. Buy to let. I mean, we all know what that is. Buy a house, rent it out. It's about as boring and vanilla as it gets. Get rich slow. In terms of return on investment, it's pretty poor. At the moment with high interest rates, it's hard to even make 10%. I'm going to give that like a 3. That's being generous. Speed, it's very slow. I mean, I'm going to have to give that. It's not as bad as buy, refurbish, refinance because you can buy it, rent it out, but just buying it's going to take a few months. I'm going to give it a 3 again. See, it's very vanilla, isn't it? Everything's going to be 3 for buy to let. It's just going to be 3, 3, 3, 3. Difficulty, yeah, it really is. It's a 3. Prior knowledge, you don't need any prior knowledge, to be fair. I'm going to give that a 6. It's pretty easy. Startup capital, you will need some money, but not that much. I mean, if you're buying in Stoke-on-Trent for 65 grand and you need a deposit of 25%, it's not that much. Risk, it's about as safe as you can get. So I'm going to give it, I'm going to say 7. I guess if the tenants don't pay, market drops, interest rates go higher, there's always some risk. How passive is it? It's pretty damn passive. I'm going to give it a 3. 3, 6, 9, 15, 20, 27, 30. See, it's a really long, 30 is just a boring number. Everything about buy-to-let is boring. Compare that to BRR, 29. See, this is flawed. This is a flawed system. Buy-to-let is definitely not better than BRR. I guess we're having fun still. And hopefully you're getting a glimpse into the strategies, but I was far too harsh on BRR and far too kind on buy-to-let. I'm also curious now to what my lease option is compared to rent-to-rent. 36. So lease option agreement is very good at a 36. Maybe buy-to-let is just underrated. Maybe buy-to-let is a good strategy. Maybe it's just underrated because it's so boring. That's mad. The thing is with buy-to-let is, if you're not a smart investor and you just walk into an estate agency and buy an average house for 300 grand and rent it out for 1,200 quid a month, you're not going to make money. So I'm kind of talking about buy-to-let how I would do it, which is, maybe it's a bit harder. Maybe when I put 3 for difficulty, maybe that should have been a 2. But anyway, we can play around with the numbers. Rent to service accommodation, 41. 41. So far, rent to service accommodation is winning, but let's see where we're going to get on with buy to HMO. Buy to HMO is when you buy a house and you rent it out, room by room, to a house in multiple occupancy, maximizing the ROI. So you're going to get a much higher return on investment if you do this. Instead of a 3 like buy to let, it's going to be more like a 7 potentially. Speed is going to be the same as buy to let. Difficulty is a bit harder. I'm going to give that a 5 instead of a 3. Prior knowledge, yeah, I'm going to give, do you need prior knowledge? Probably, a little bit. 6. Startup capital, yeah, you're going to need a bit of money. 5. Risk, I mean, to be honest, it's less risky than a buy-to-let because you've got different options, different strategies. So I'm going to say the risk is very low. I'll give it an 8, how risk-free it is. Passive, maybe a 4. So in total, what we got? 38. Good strategy, solid. Deal sourcing is when you find deals, you don't buy them, you just package them and present them to an investor and charge a finder's fee. So on average, you're going to get paid what? 2% commission. If you're finding a deal for 300 grand, that's a £6,000 finder's fee. If you do that once a week, you're doing okay. You're making more money than brain surgeons, doctors, and lawyers. From an ROI point of view, it's tough because you're not putting any money down, but your time. So it's return on investment is more about your time. So it's very tough to score, but it's obviously high. Really, we're gonna have to say it's 10 out of 10, aren't we? Because if you're making 6 grand a week, how much money are you going to have to put down into the business? Bit of money on some training, bit of money on some contracts, and you're making 20 grand a month. Speed is ridiculously fast. 10 out of 10. You could find a deal tomorrow and sell it the next day and charge 5 grand. Difficulty, yeah, it's quite difficult. I'm going to give it a 3. Learning how to sell, how to find investors, take some time. Prior knowledge, yeah, I'm going to give it a 3. Startup capital, 0. So I'm going to give that a 10 because you don't need any money to get started pretty much. Risk, well, there's nothing really that you're risking because you're not putting money down. So very, very low risk. I'll give that a 9. Passive, it's not passive. I mean, it can be if you hire staff, but I'm going to give it a 2. It's really not passive. So your total score is what? 47. So far, that's the best strategy. I knew it. Emergency accommodation. That's when you rent houses to the council. for emergency accommodation. You can get a ridiculously high amount of money from doing this, and I've done this with some of my properties, and they are absolute bangers. So from a return on investment, it's a 10. From a speed, depends how you define speed. It can take time to build up relationships with the council. So I'm going to give that a 6. Difficulty, pretty easy. It's not about what you know, it's more about who you know. It's about network. I'm going to give that a 5. Prior knowledge, 5. Startup capital, depends how you do it, so I guess it's a 5. Risk, it's very risky if you don't have an exit strategy, so I'll give that probably a 3. How passive is it? It can be very passive. I mean, mine are very passive. I'll have to give that a 6. And finally, capital appreciation. What does this mean? So many investors just buy houses and buy property and sit on it and wait, and they don't care about the rent. They don't make any income from it. They're just holding on for it to go up in value one day. Land bankers, we call them. They just buy land and wait, and it's just like better than money in the bank. So return on investment, I'm going to give that a 1 because these people do not make cash flow at all. Speed, well, it's terrible. It's 1. Difficulty, it's really easy. I'll give it a 10. Prior knowledge, you don't need any prior knowledge. Give it a 10. Startup capital, you will need money to start because you're pumping money into these properties and just sitting on them and waiting for them. So I'll give that a 3. Risk, there is some risk because it might not go up in value. If you're sitting on it and just hoping it's going to double every 10 years because it did previously, what happens if it doesn't? I think it's a bit risky. I'm going to give it a 3. How passive is it? It's very passive. It's got to be a 10. So in total, what we got? 33, 36, 37, 38. 38. Solid. And what about emergency accommodation? 40. 40. So we've got as the winning strategy, we've got deal sourcing, followed closely by rent to service accommodation, followed by emergency accommodation, good strategy, jointly followed by buy to HMO and capital appreciation. I guess capital appreciation will get you rich. Followed by lease option agreement. Followed by buy to let. Followed by BRR. BRR came bomb. I'm so sorry, BRR. I love you, BRR. You know we're in a relationship. I'm doing loads of you right now as we speak across the country. I'm going to leave below a printout sheet where you can print off one of these boards at home, and you can do this and see what scores you get, and let me know in the comments what were your scores, what do you think of how I rated these, and what strategy do you think is the best to worst. In order, I'll be pinning the best comment and I'll be responding to as many comments as I possibly can. Comment below, download this board, and I'll see you next time.